Okay, you're a co-host now, so you'll be able to share your screen using the share screen at the bottom.
Okay.
And then a pop-up will show up and you'll just select the document that you want.
Say again, a pop-up will show up.
Yeah, and then it'll show you whatever window you have open. And then from there, you'll be able to do that. I'm going to mute myself. That way you guys don't have to listen to the phone ring the whole time.
Okay, show me where I'm showing, where I can share the screen. I do share screen.
You'll have to click on like policy.
Okay.
And then share. I would be closer to there and you can see what's got going on or sign anything on there and mute yourself and sign.
So I want to get to desktop.
That way you can see what she's sharing. So you're going to go to the or actually you're in the run probably here. You're going to
All right, kiddo, now I want to get to my desktop, which I have opened, residential sales contract. But it's not.
Morning. And then we're going to. How are you?
Hi.
Good, how are you?
Good. Are you?
Diana.
Are you onboarding today?
No, she's gonna get her license ready, just get transferred.
I think
Oh, so everybody will see that.
So now they're seeing this.
Yep. Haydenthose.com.
Have a seat. Yeah. No, I'm not gonna on there. Well, it wouldn't have hurt, but she wouldn't be into the, you wouldn't be into everything yet, so you wouldn't be able to read the contract. Yeah, print one out. Let me see if I can. You might want to sit over here and just watch my computer.
That's a great
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Jim's new, fairly new. He's been here, what, 3 or 4 weeks? Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to go ahead and get started because Elise has gotten me into this, which I never have. Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. I had a week off, which I've rested and ready to go again. So the thing I want to go over first off is that we are still having a lot of problems with agents, even experienced agents, not getting their paperwork, all of their paperwork into command. This is a Missouri Real Estate Commission law. The office has to have copies of everything that you do when you go under contract, and those contracts have to be accessible by me and the Missouri Real Estate Commission should they audit us. So the minute you write a contract, whether it's a listing contract or a buyer's agency or a sales contract, I don't care how you write it, if you write it by hand and scan it and put it on your desktop, you have to put it into command. And once it's signed by everybody, then when it's in command, you want to turn it in for review by Karen. Again, if you don't do this prior to closing and things aren't done, our requirements are that you have to have your contracts in and all the required paperwork that we ask for, and there's a list of that in command. That paperwork must be in there and it will be looked at by Karen, and if you're missing anything, you're not going to get paid. Ain't that right, Dan? Because we have to follow the Missouri Real Estate Commission rules, and this is the only way we can. We all miss stuff. I do too. So when we are writing these contracts in, they should be in command within 2 days of everybody's signatures on the contracts and turned into Karen for review. So today we're going to kind of go over, because I have 2 or 3 newer agents here. We're going to go over the residential sales contract. I have it up here for you to see. And I'm just going to kind of glance over most of it. Number 1, you're going to put the buyer's name, and that buyer's name is going to be how they want to put their title. If I wanted to say C.L. Wardenburg, I could do that, or Connie Lynette Wardenburg, or Connie L. Wardenburg. If I was the buyer, it's however they want that to be titled in their name at the courthouse. And then, of course, you're going to, the second one, none of our places are incorporated, so we don't have to fill that in. because it says if left blank, deemed unincorporated outside the municipal boundaries and commonly known as, and then you want to have the exact street address, which should be exactly what's on the MLS sheet, and the city, zip code, and county. If you are, most addresses are sufficient when we're talking about sales contracts. When we're doing a lot sales contract and we do not have an address because no one lives there, so there's no mailing address, and you just know that it's on Highway W, and MLS shows to be determined, TBD, Highway W, you have to attach some kind of a legal description, which could be from the GIS for the county, a copy of the plat, outline so you know exactly what it is that you're buying, or it could be the PID number from the county, anything, or a copy of the warranty deed, which you quite often can get from the county. So all those things, if it's a to be determined address, you have to check this box and attach it to this contract. That would be the sales contract or the listing contract, either one. We go on down and it says these are included. Property included, but is not limited to all the following, if any, which is now located on the real estate in which the seller is selling to convey to the buyer, free and clear at closing. This contract and not a seller's disclosure statement, multiple listing service, promotion material provides for what is included in the sale. So down here, even though we've got all this stuff in here, it says garage door openers and control. I would reiterate that. The range, refrigerator, washer, dryer, water softener owned, 10 by 20 boat slip, or two-well dock with hoist. You want that all in there. You want to rewrite it, because one of the biggest things that we get involved with in contracts is a fight over the personal property. And this happens more than you all realize, where the seller takes something when he closes and the buyer comes down and then they're not going to close because the refrigerator's gone and you end up buying a refrigerator. You don't want to do that, so have it on there that's included. And if there are certain things that are excluded specifically, you want to make sure that that's on there also, such as maybe the washer and dryer is not included, so put not included on there. So everyone knows exactly what is being transferred with the property. If you need to make a list to be attached, you can put that on there, see attached personal property list, Exhibit A or whatever, and attach that to the contract to be signed by both buyer and seller also. You also on that, it's real easy to want to put everything on there. If your people are getting a loan, and we do this with a lot of condos, especially in some lakefront homes where they're also selling the furniture, most lenders are not going to allow you to have that furniture on the contract. So if you say included, see furniture list Exhibit A. If that appraiser goes out and says, well, it's got furniture, that's not included, they're going to have to try to appraise it. You want that furniture list off, so then the lender's going to say to you, remove that furniture list. So what you need to do, if furniture is included, you need to have a detailed list of the furniture. If the listing agent doesn't have that, then you may need to go out and take it yourself. I encourage you, when you take a listing and the furniture is included, to go out and make that list and say, the following personal property items are included as a benefit to the seller with no value to the buyer at the top, and then have a place at the bottom for the buyer and seller to sign this. But again, you don't want to say anything about that furniture list on a contract if they're getting a loan. If it's a cash deal, no big deal. But if it's a loan, the lender's going to ask you to take that off. So you say to me, well, the contract doesn't say the furniture list, but we're going to include it. Well, when you write the contract, you send that furniture list over at the same time as the contract, and you say it's included in the sale as a benefit to the seller with no value to the buyer, and have them both sign it, and there's your list. It says it's going to go with it, so that works. Purchase price, of course, this is what the buyer is going to offer for the property. Seller's concessions, this used to be only if it was a VA or an FHA or USDA loan, but now sometimes people are putting on here that they want the seller to concede a certain amount of money at closing, which would come off of the settlement statement. That settlement statement would be, for example, if you're getting an FHA loan and they're getting a 97% loan or a VA loan, they're going to have, even though they're only putting 3% of the purchase price down, they also have usually a pretty substantial amount of closing costs, mainly from the lender. So they need to know approximately what those closing costs are. So you need to tell them, you need to talk to your lender, because you're not going to write this contract probably unless you've already got a approval from a lender. So you're going to ask them, make sure you find out what their closing costs are, so we can put that on there. That way it's a credit to you at closing on the statement, and you don't have to pay it. It's a debit to the seller. So that's what that seller's concessions are. Do you all understand what I'm saying? Okay. Okay. Earnest money, of course, that's the amount of earnest money they're going to put down. There's a real question on this, because if it's the market that we're in right now, the earnest money can make the difference between whether a seller will take it or not. But I want you to also let your buyer know that no matter what, this earnest money is in jeopardy. So if it's subject to financing or subject to inspections, and the inspections go wrong and the buyer and the seller or the buyer wants out, they're not going to get their earnest money back if they don't have a signed mutual release. And it says it right here. In addition, earnest money is to be supplied at time prior to closing if any earnest money is to be treated as non-refundable. Attach an appropriate rider, which we have one of those, earnest money rider. And then it says, see also number 8. Number 8 is on the 3rd page, I believe. Number 8, disposition of earnest money. This is stated in everything that deals with earnest money, that notwithstanding anything here to the contrary, escrow agent and the closing agent, as the case may be, escrow holder, shall not distribute the earnest money or any other escrowed funds held by the escrow funds without the written consent of all parties to this contract. Otherwise, escrow holders shall continue to hold escrow funds in escrow until escrow holder has a written agreement signed by all parties consenting to its disposition. Oh, where am I? Disposition, and may be required by applicable law. A broker who is holding funds in dispute between the parties is required to report and deliver the money to the state treasurer within 365 days initial. So what we're saying here is that even if it's a clear-cut case of you've got $5,000 earnest money in there, and the seller and the buyer get mad at each other and they get in a fight over the inspections, that earnest money will not automatically be returned to the buyer or the seller. It has to be a mutual release signed by both parties stating who gets it. So this is why I always tell my buyers, the more earnest money we put down, the stronger our contract. But that earnest money is in jeopardy. If they don't sign the mutual release, if something goes wrong, then it sits at the title company, and your only remedy is to take them to small claims court. So I let them know that up front. I don't want somebody to go, well, wait a minute. You know, they didn't agree, we couldn't agree on what needed to be fixed as far as the inspections go, or the septic failed and can't be fixed, and it's a $40,000 fix, and so I'm backing out of the contract. But legally, they've got the right to back out of the contract. But that earnest money is not going to be released to them just because of that, unless both the seller and the buyer sign to have it released. So that earnest money is always in jeopardy. It's not an automatic, you get it back if things don't go right. I want my buyers to know that. I don't want them to say, wait a minute, you didn't tell me that. You know, we go through the contract and it's going to bomb, and the seller says, well, I'm not signing anything. And then I'm going to have to go back to the buyer and say, well, guess what? Number 8 states that in the contract, that you can't get your earnest money back unless everybody agrees to it. And since they don't agree to it, your only remedy is to go to small claims court. That's a
So they
huge.
don't have anything.
They don't have anything signed saying who it goes to unless it's a non-refundable. In other words, it doesn't automatically say in here anywhere that if you're, it says that if you can't get your loan, that you'll get your earnest money back, but then it references number 8. And number 8 says you won't get it back unless both parties have signed the mutual release. So it kind of contradicts itself. This came about years ago. Every real estate company had their own escrow account. No one keeps their escrow accounts now because there's such liability with it. And then when the title company started holding the escrowed money, and they would return the money to the buyer or the seller because that's what the contract said, and that's what happened, and we could prove that, then they were getting sued by the other party that they couldn't do that. So they now absolutely will not release that money without the mutual release. Of course, you're going to put in here who's going to handle the earnest, who's going to hold the earnest money. I was told the other day in this market that we have that a top agent in Kansas City was actually, in order to be more competitive with other offers, which we all know we're having multiple offers going right now, that he was actually saying that the earnest money was going to be delivered to the seller when the contract was written. So it's not refundable. So inspections don't go through, they don't get their loan, they're not going to get their earnest money back. But if it's a really strong market like we have, and you want to have an edge up on some other buyers, you might say, Mr. Seller, I'm going to put $5,000 earnest money down, and I'm going to give it to you within 5 days of everything being signed, and it's yours. This could say to the buyer, to the seller, he's serious about it, number one. And worst case scenario, I don't have to fight over the earnest money because they have to have the earnest money mutual release signed. And I can use that money to move, to do repairs, whatever needs to be done. That's not a normal thing to do, but it can be done. And if you're in a multiple situation where everybody's trying to overbid and escalation clauses and all that kind of stuff, you could say, Mr. Seller, I'm going to give you the earnest money no later than 5 days of the effective date. And we all know the effective date is the date that the final person signs the offer. So if I wrote the offer on the 1st and the seller signed it on the 2nd, 2nd is the effective date. So that's just a little tidbit to maybe set you apart from somebody else. As long as your buyer realizes he's not going to get that money back, it's going directly to the seller in his property. You might think that's a good deal. And this guy in Kansas City who's been doing this actually has beat out other offers that were higher because of that. But who knows? Still credited to the buyer. So on the settlement statement, if it's $5,000, the buyer gets $5,000 credit because he's given it to the seller already. Yeah, exactly. Because it is earnest money. Another thing is you really have to watch this. Earnest money shall be delivered to buyer, escrow agent, no later than blank 5 days unless otherwise specified the effective date. If your buyer is out of town and you're writing this contract, you may want to put 7 days or 10 days in here and give him time to get the earnest money in. Because if they don't have the earnest money in within that 5-day period, this contract is not binding. In which case, I want you to realize that you have to be responsible for knowing where that earnest money is. Now, a lot of agents will have it mailed directly to the title company, and that's fine. But then you need to be in touch with that title company in case that title company doesn't notify you, is the earnest money there yet? So you got the 5 days or the 10 days, whatever you put in there. I normally have them send it to my home. That way I know I got it and I take the title company. So in 3 days, if I haven't gotten that earnest money, I'm calling and say, have you mailed it? I haven't gotten it yet. And if I haven't gotten it by a 5th day, then I'm writing an amendment to the contract, changing that time frame, and hopefully the seller will sign it also. Because of course, contracts can be amended and changed, but only if both agree and sign the amendment, both buyer and seller. Otherwise, it's exactly how it's written here. We also, sometimes there's a rider for an additional earnest money. I'm going to put $1,000 down now, but after I have inspections, I'll put an extra $10,000 down, whatever you want to do. There is a rider for almost anything that you would need to do. You just have to look in the contracts and see where they're at. And then, of course, your closing usually is at the title company who's holding the earnest money. If you're going to put Great American Title here, you'd want to put, is it the Osage Beach location or the Camdenton location? And then you've got the date, month, date, and year that we're going to close. Don't just think you can pull a date out of here. Make sure that you know, number one, how long does the lender think he needs to get his loan approval, which you're going to put on the next page. And then once we get the loan approval and the appraisals done, can we get the inspections done on time? We have to have enough time to close, which is usually 30 to 45 days. Also make sure that this date that you're putting in here, July 2nd, is a date that that buyer is available to come down and close. I've done this in the past where we picked a date, buyer didn't look at it, and then all of a sudden after we got an accepted contract, goes, oh, you know what? We were going to Europe for a month. They're not even going to be here. So make sure that it works for them. You cannot close on a Saturday because you can't fund. Friday is a tough day for closings because there are usually a whole bunch of them. And if you're going to close on a Friday, you need to get it closed in the morning so it will disperse. A closing constitutes the signing of the warranty deed by the sellers and the escrow or the money there from the lender to close so it can be dispersed. So if it's on a Friday and it doesn't go till late in the afternoon and that lender doesn't get the money wired to the title company, you haven't closed. And truthfully, the buyer should not take possession until you've closed, which may mean Monday when they're going to disperse, in which case you're going to need to write an amendment to the contract changing the closing date. If it was to close on Friday and you can't close because the funds weren't there, then it has to be when the funds are there, hopefully on Monday. So you have to get that paperwork done. We also have possession by the sellers and by the buyers prior to or after closing. I never suggest that a buyer gets in prior to closing, because if he does, he starts finding things wrong with the house, or if he doesn't close, how do you get him out? I quite often, especially with people that live full-time, have possession by seller after closing. What this means is that buyer can't actually do that walkthrough and see the seller's out and no holes have been put in the walls or anything. But we had this happen, and it happens more than not. Just this last week, a 95-year-old seller closing on his place, moved his furniture out, went to assisted living, cost him money to do that, and the buyer backed out. If we would have had possession by the seller after closing, so you're going to close on Friday, and you close, the seller gets his money and he has to be out by Monday. Then he can schedule his movers and everything to be done that way. So for your sellers, if it's your listing, for your sellers' protection, they live there full time, and especially if they're older adults or young couples with little kids or whatever, I suggest that you do that. You have possession after closing. Now, will all buyers allow that? No, you have to determine whether it's going to work out or not, but it's a really good protection. I had a little lady in Eldon years ago, widowed, and she moved all of her stuff out, and the buyers didn't close. You can sue the buyers for not closing for performance, but it's almost impossible to force them into buying it. Usually what you get is some kind of compensation for what you've spent or lost. And again, that's the seller taking the buyer to court. And we don't like to get into that situation. Do I have any questions so far? I want you to question me and stop me if I'm going too fast or doing whatever. This sales appraisal financing contingency, this has been added to these contracts just the last few weeks. It says it's not contingent on the sale or closing of an existing property, or it is, and if it is, of course, you're doing that, the MSC 2021 or 2022R. Appraisal, I normally check this box. Again, we're in a market that it may not always be advisable. If you know that your buyer will go above appraised price, don't check the box, but make sure he realizes that. You can't get out of this because it didn't appraise. So you want to make sure that the whole thing is that your buyer is aware of what he's doing. This is a $100,000 house. I'm going to write a contract for $125,000 because I've lost 4 contracts and I have to have this house. Mr. Buyer, are you willing to dig in your pocket and pull out $25,000 extra that's going to be charged to you at closing? Because probably your loan may not incorporate into that. Because the lender's only going to loan on the appraised value. So if you're getting a 90% loan on $100,000, you're borrowing $90,000. You've got $10,000 of your own cash. If you know you're overpaying for the property and it appraises at 100, and you've written a contract for 125, you're going to come up with $35,000 out of your pocket. People are doing that, but they have to be made aware that that's what they're doing. You understand what's going on. So we're really in here to teach our buyers. Don't assume that they realize this, because they do not. You know, so that's the appraisal contingency. Again, I want to point out to you when it says blank days, 25 if none stated. I don't want you to fill 25 in there. If you're going to change that date to 30 or 40 or 10 or whatever, then fill it in. But if it says 25 if none stated, here it says 5 if none stated, don't fill that in if it's staying the same, 5 or 25. Okay? Now, contingent upon financing. Number 1, not contingent upon financing, although not a condition to performance, buyer may finance any portions of the purchase price. And then also check the following if applicable. There is a pre-approved letter, proof of purchase, sufficient funds to complete the closing is attached. So if you're writing this contract as a buyer's agent and you have that pre-approval letter, check that box and say he's pre-approved. Now this is the same thing as a cash offer, even though they're going to finance it. So they can't get out of the contract with this contingency if their lender says, no, you can't get the money. Also, anybody that's sold at the lake knows the best thing to always do is get your buyers in contact with a local lender. The one that comes down from Sioux City, Iowa, and says, oh no, I'm using my local bank up here. That may work, but it's difficult. They're not used to our stuff down here. They don't realize that the docks are usually included, even though they can be sold and moved in their personal property. They don't realize our floodplains and different things that we have. So you want to make sure that you at least put them in contact with a couple of lenders down here. And what I do is I say, I know you've got a great relationship with your bank up there, but if you're loaning on the property down here, let me put you in contact with 2 other lenders that are local and compare their rates and cost of getting a loan with yours and see if they're not better. Okay? And then, of course, non-conventional would be an FHA, VA, or USDA loan in which you would attached to riders. That's on line 73. And then conventional loan, that they're getting a conventional loan, 25 days. They've usually already started that. Hopefully I would not be taking people out if they didn't have pre-approval of some kind. And then you're going to put they're getting an 80% or 90% or 97%. I always fill in the percentage on line 88. I never put an amount over here, because if I had made $100,000 offer and I put that they're going to borrow 90%, and I put $90,000 over here on the next line, and then it's countered and it's going to be 110, then this thing is wrong, and I have to change both of those. So I only put in complete, like it says, one or both. I only complete the first one, the percent that they're going to borrow. Initial interest rate not to exceed. I normally put approximately what our interest rate is right now. So right now it's at 3 something. I'd probably put 4. I always usually put a 30-year term, and I usually put a fixed rate, because this paragraph on financing is only used to get the buyer out of the contract if he can't get the loan. So if it says it's a 90% loan at 4% over 30 years, and it's a fixed rate, and the lender's pre-approved him, and then the lender goes, oh, you know what, we can't do a fixed rate with this. It's got to be an adjustable rate. He can get out of it, because he has to have a letter from his lender saying we can't give him the loan on a fixed rate, and only can be adjustable. You've marked fixed on there. Now, can they do different than what they want? In other words, if they put a 90% loan at 4%, and they put fixed, and he says, you know, you're going to be better off if you do an adjustable, they can do that. This is only to get them out of the contract because of the contingency. I usually do the fix. Always. They shouldn't, as long as the seller. So you've gone to the contract and you send them a letter within the time frame, because if that 25 days goes by and you send them a letter on the 26th, you're out of contract. That goes away if you don't meet the deadlines. So if you send them on one on the 20th day and say, I can't get my fixed rate, here's my letter from my my lender. And so I'm going to sign the mutual lease and get my earnest money back. Usually people sign the mutual lease, number one, because they can't put it back on the market until they've done that, because they're under contract. So it's there. It's just that if buyers and sellers get angry with each other, and that's the most important thing we do, is to keep everybody happy. And you do that by talking to them and not slandering somebody else, or the seller's a jerk, or the agent I'm working with won't do her thing. They don't care about that. Keep that to yourself and do your job. You don't want people angry with each other, and quite often they do. And I always say, why are you angry? They love your house like you love your house, and they want to buy it, and we've agreed to a price. So let's work through these things. You know, what makes sense to do this. Title and survey, again, 10 if done stated. And then normally in our area, we do number C here, that the buyer pays for the title commitment, and the seller pays for the title. The seller pays for the title commitment, and the buyer pays for the owner's policy. In Jefferson City, they normally do B, 50-50. You can do any of these, but typically in our area, the seller is used to paying for the commitment, which is usually $150, $200. And then, of course, the owner's policy is around $3.50 per thousand. So if it's a $300,000 house, it's $900, you know, that. Commitment to be issued by the title company that you're closing through, and you put that name in there. Buyer has 20 days to review the title commitment, and then the buyer has 20 days of the review period, and then they have 20 days after the review period to review such a manner to deliver notice of objections to the seller. Again, if there's something wrong with the title, you want to know that immediately, which you get in that title commitment. Your title companies normally will send you the copy of the title commitment. Sometimes they don't even send it to the buyer. They send it to you for you to send to the buyer. So make sure your buyer's got that title commitment and has had time to look it over. Typically, most of our local title companies will let us know, oh my gosh, Connie, you've got a problem. This doesn't have clear title, or there's another person on the title that needs to be signed, or they're married now, even though it's in the husband's name. Now they're married, so the wife has to sign this contract too. So they normally will call and let you know that when they see it, but that depends on your title company. You know, they're not required to. This goes down, talks about seller's expense. If he doesn't agree to the title objections. Inspections, we go on down to inspections. All buyers have the right to have an inspection. If your buyer does not have an inspection, you have to, and this is in our rules on the list of stuff, you either have to have an inspection notice or you have to have an inspection notice waiver stating that they've decided not to have inspections. That waiver states, or that notice states, that you have told them they need to have an inspection. Even on a brand new house, I tell my buyers, I'm going to tell you, you have to have an inspection, because if I told you not to have one, or don't worry about the radon, or don't worry about the water, that's the thing that'll go wrong. And then you're mad at me. Also, we usually never go to the inspections because we are not inspectors. We encourage our buyers to go to the inspections, and the sellers can even be there. But we do not go ourselves, because if we do, then we put ourselves out as inspectors the minute we say something like, well, what about that? You know, so we are not inspectors. That's not our job. We are not lenders. That's not our job. We are not appraisers. That's not our job. We are not surveyors. That's not our job. So we rely on those people to do those type of things. You have the inspection. 10 days is not enough right now. You need to make that at least 15 to 21 for inspections. And then a specialist report, 5 if none stated. So your inspection comes back and says, everything looks fine except this and this, but you should have someone, a specialist, look at the fireplace. So then you're going to want to let the listing agent, you're going to fill in that paperwork. Notice it's MSC 2047N, that you're going to have a specialist report. You've got 5 days, if none stated, or 10, whatever you put in there, to get these specialists out there to look at the fireplace or the roof or whatever it is. Again, if you don't do these within these time frames, this goes away. So if you don't have your inspection notice in within that 10-day period, or that whatever you put in there, 21-day period, you let that lapse and you haven't sent them the notice along with the entire inspection report, it goes away. They can't fall back on getting out of the contract. Well, right now we are bombed with stuff and it's really hard to get things done. So you newer agents, if you're not used to doing this, I would ask a seasoned agent, you know, what's it taking for inspections right now? Who would you have? I normally give them a couple, 2 to 3 names, and I send them to them, and I say, and I put them in direct contact. I never hire the inspector myself. I say, I've got a list of inspectors. These are 3 I've used in the prior that I think do a pretty good job. So I'm going to give you all 3 names, and you can call them and decide which one you want. They have different prices, different things, what they do. Or I might even have the inspector called in. I might say, Dave DeGraff and Reed, I've got a new buyer. He's going to close and needs an inspection within 2 weeks. Will you give him a call? Here's his number. And I let the buyer know that I'm having Dave DeGraff and Reed call him, or whoever. We're going to have one inspection. So again, you put them in contact with each other, and you don't interpret the inspection report. You let the inspector interpret the inspection report. So the inspection report comes back and says, this needs to be fixed. That buyer needs to talk to the inspector and say, how major is this? He says, oh, it's nothing really. It happens to all houses. Or no, it needs to be looked at. You know, that's between We don't make decisions for our buyers. We don't advise them, you need to fix this, I wouldn't worry about this. The inspector can do that. But if we did that, you need to fix this, but don't worry about this. This is what's going to be the problem. And this is going to come back to haunt you. Because you told them, don't worry about it. So I don't get involved with anything that I let them make the decision as to what they need, what they want fixed. And I asked them to be reasonable about it. I said, you're not in here, you're not buying a new house. So, you know, and if you knew up front that the windows were clouded because it's obvious, the sliders were clouded, if you made that offer knowing that you had to replace those sliders, then don't come back and say replace the sliders in the inspection report. Or in the contract say, this contract is subject to buyers replacing the clouded windows prior to closing. Have it right in there, and that's already part of it. And it has nothing to do with the inspections. The inspections are supposed to be to find things that your buyer won't know, especially major things. You know, if you see there's a big hole in the carpet, you knew that when you wrote the offer. You know what I'm saying? So I tell them the inspections are for things that they wouldn't normally know: radon, septic, that type of thing, water, the roof, foundation, whatever. And so we want the inspector. I'm going to say you have to have inspections, or you're going to sign this thing that says I told you to have them, but you opted not to. But things that you already knew about, you should have based your price on. You're not buying a new house. Okay, there's a difference and it doesn't even have to be new. A new house and a house that's 30 years old that's been completely remodeled with new bathrooms, new HVAC systems, new roof, new flooring, new paint, all that kind of stuff can qualify like a new house. But it's in what you're buying. You know, you don't buy a house that's 40 years old and then say, oh, well, I want a new HVAC system. If the HVAC system is working, even though it's 20 or 30 years old, it's working. So if you wanted a new HVAC system when you wrote the contract because you knew it was old, you should have put that in the contract to begin with. Because you're going to lose out if you don't. They're not going to buy it usually. So this is if it waives the rights to terminate this contract. Buyer waives option. This is on line 171. Buyer must give seller an opportunity to correct prior to scheduled closing date unacceptable conditions. In an inspection report, you can mark something that says that they want out of the contract because the inspections are so bad. Maybe they found mold and you're deathly allergic to mold and you don't want it remediated, you just don't want the house. So you can get out of the contract with that. But if you mark this, it says you're going to allow the buyer, the seller, to fix that if he so chooses. So I very seldom check that box. This is a resolution period. You got 10 days to work out your, Mr. Seller, I want you to fix this. Mr. Seller says, I won't, but I'll fix this. And Mr. Buyer goes, well, I'll take this amount of money. So you've got 10 days to work that out. Government inspections, we don't have very much of that, but we do have some. Home warranties. I encourage you as agents to always, even if your seller won't pay for a warranty, have the buyer pay for a warranty. But I would always ask the seller to pay for a warranty. Seller agrees to pay up to $600 for a warranty. It's just another way of protecting your buyer and your seller, because if the furnace goes out week 2 of the buyer's closing, then they've got a homeowner's warranty that's going to fix or replace it. Isn't that worth $600 to the buyer and the seller? It is. Again, here's that number 8, disposition of earnest money, where it talks about it will not be refunded unless it's signed mutual lease. Loss and condemnation talks about if something happens to the house before they close. Adjustments at closing talks about who's paying for what. Buyers shall pay for where applicable. These are usually things they're paying for and seller pays for. This is the entire agreement. Number 13, if either party defaults in the forms or obligations under this contract, the party claiming the default shall notify the other in writing of the nature of the default and the party election of remedy. The notifying party may, but is not required to, provide the defaulting party with a deadline for curing the default. Following the default by either seller or buyer, the other party shall have the following remedies. So this talks about what happens if the seller defaults. In other words, he's supposed to fix something and he hasn't, or the buyer defaults, and who the prevailing. In the event of any litigation between the parties pertaining to this contract, I'm on line 344. Prevailing parties shall be entitled to recover, in addition to any damages or equitable relief, the cost and expense of litigation, including court costs and reasonable attorney fees. So this says if they go to court, you're probably going to have to pay for their attorney too. Seller's disclosure statement, they either have one or you want them to get you one within 1 day or 2 days or whatever, or there will not be one. Why would there not be a seller's disclosure? It was my parents' house. I've never lived there. I know nothing about it. There will be no seller's disclosure. Make sure lead-based paint. When you're selling a property, it says in the MLS when it was built. When you write on that property, if it says it's built in 1970 or before 1978, there should be a lead-based paint disclosure in there. That has to be signed prior to the contract being signed. You can't sign a contract and negotiate out and then get a lead-based paint disclosure. HUD will come after you and it's $11,000 per occurrence fine. You do not want that to happen. So make sure that you watch that lead-based paint, and that lead-based paint brochure is given to your buyer. So if you're selling in Eldon, a lot of the homes in there are built before 1978. So I just immediately print out that lead-based paint brochure, and when I'm showing the houses, I make sure before we write the contract that I've got that lead-based paint disclosure signed by the seller. They talk about walkthrough. You always want to do a walkthrough. If they can't do a walkthrough, then I want you to have them sign that paperwork that said they can't do one. But walkthrough is normally, if we're going to close at 10, I try to meet them at the house at 8, do a walkthrough, make sure everything's there. The other day we had a walkthrough, and guess what? The seller took the refrigerator. Guess who bought the refrigerator? The listing agent and the buyer's agent. Because the seller had moved to Oklahoma. How are you going to get it from him? How are you going to get it from him? It was in the contract. It stays. But they just decided they want to take it with them, so they took it. This happens, guys. So no upfront. I normally would, when the seller moves out, I would normally go check if it was my listing and make sure everything was supposed to be there. Yeah, the worst thing that happened was the buyer did not do a walkthrough, and so they didn't know it till after the closing. So they closed, seller got the money, it's a done deal, and there's no refrigerator. So then who they come back on? The listing agent and the buyer's agent. Governing laws, this is just that it's a state of Missouri. Notices shall be delivered to the seller in writing, shall be deemed delivered to the seller upon delivery to. So in other words, whoops. In other words, when you get a notice, any notice, consent, approval, request, waiver, objection, or other communication collectively notice required under the contract after its acceptance to be delivered to the seller shall be in writing and shall be deemed delivered to the seller upon delivery thereof to the broker or affiliate licensee. So when the seller gives you a notice of something and it's supposed to be today, is when that notice has to be done. When you get it, it's the same thing as getting the buyer getting it. So you have to get it to the buyer immediately. Don't dally on anything that you might think, well, I'll call them tomorrow, or I can't reach them. Call them and say, I've got the notice, leave a message, email them, text them, do all three, and say you've got to get it to them. The biggest thing that agents do is they don't communicate. If you aren't in constant communication and let your buyer or your seller know what's going on with the contract, and making sure when you get that notice or that amendment or whatever, that it's given to your buyer or your seller, whoever you're representing in a timely manner. You are at fault. You are at fault. The riders, of course, government loan rider, contingency sale of a buyer's existing property. It's a backup contract. Others, number one, in this office, if we are selling a lakefront home, we have addendum A, which talks about, which has to be signed by the buyer and the seller. Addendum A is talking about the floodplain, and that the seller will have proof that the house is not in a floodplain, or will get a LOMA letter, or correct whatever problems, or and also that they have got the dock permitted for the dock that's there, and that the electric is up to specifications of Ameren in order to transfer the dock. This has to go on every lakefront home, not condo, not offshore, because we're not worried about offshore properties on floodplains, and we're not worried about offshore properties with boat docks, electricity and stuff like that. So, unless it has a dock offshore and they've got a dock because they haven't access, then you would want that in there also, or other agreements, special agreements. This. I want you to be very careful in writing the special agreements. We are not attorneys. There are some things that you could write in here, but I would suggest that prior to putting something in special agreements that you call me and ask me about it. Quite often I'll say, oh, guess what? There's a form for that. So don't start in here writing that the seller is going to do this and this, or he's going to stay after, he's not going to move out, or the buyer's going to move his furniture into the garage prior to closing. Those kind of things you want to talk to me about. Licenses, personal interest. Of course, we need to let any buyer and seller know if we are if we are owners, or if we were related family members of the owners. So Connie Wardenburg is either a party to this transaction, or is a principal or a direct or indirect ownership interest in this. Maybe it's an LLC, or an immediate family member of the seller or the buyer. It's my mother's house, it's my daughter's house, it's my sister's house. You have to let them know that you have a personal interest in that. And that being said, realize that if this is your listing and you have personal ownership, you cannot represent the buyer. I own this property, or I have partial ownership, or it's my mother's. I can't sign a buyer's agency for this property because I can't represent the buyer when it's myself that I'm representing, or my mother or my sister. It's just a fact. Just doesn't tell me. If they want representation, then you may have to put them with another agent, which you should try to get them with another agent in this office that's not on your team. Say, well, let me put you with Sherry Stevens or whoever, and she can write the contract for you, and she can represent you, because we do designated agency in this office. Y'all realize what designated agency is? Okay. Number one, you are not a buyer's agent if you don't have a signed buyer's agency agreement. You're a transaction broker if you're short on property. Number two, you're not a seller's agent if you don't have a listing agreement. In this office, to do away with dual agency, when you take a listing or a buyer's agency, there's a place for me to sign with your name up above that you, the agent, are designated as the designated agent for this seller or this buyer. That's only on the listing agreement and the buyer's agency agreement. When I designate you, that means you particularly are that person's agent. So someone else not on your team, if it's your team, it's the same thing as you. But if it's another agent in this office and they've got a designated buyer's agency and you've got a designated listing, you're designated agent for the buyer, designated for the seller. If it's on your team, say you have a team, you're with Sherry Wigg's team. If you're on a team and Sherry has the listing and you have a buyer's agent, even though I marked you designated, you're on the same team, you have to be a dual agent. dual agents where you're working for both sides is a difficult position to be in. Try to stay away from that as much as possible. So in order to do that in this office, which we have the majority of the listings in our MLS, us and Remax, and we sell a lot of our own listings, we do designated, so I can say, you can be the buyer's agent and you can be the listing agent, and you're working for the seller and you're working for the buyer. That makes sense? We do not do sub-agent. You know, sub-agent is someone from another company that would say, I'm a sub-agent. That's the same thing as saying that they're an agent under you, under this company, under the seller. We used to do that all the time. We don't do that anymore. Because do you want Joe Schmo with ABC Realty saying he's a sub-agent, so whatever he tells his buyer, it falls on you and the seller? So we do not do sub-agents, and that's the only thing we don't. We do buyer's agent, transaction broker. You're a transaction broker if you don't have a listing, if you're not showing your own listing, or if you don't have a buyer's agency. It's an automatic default position. I'm not working for anyone. I'm here to write the contract and do whatever, but I'm not representing you. A transaction broker can give no advice. So once they start asking for, well, what do you think it's worth? Whoops, can't do that unless I'm your agent. So you want to sign a buyer's agency with me? Guess what? It can be for a day. It can be for this contract only. It can be for a week. It can be for a year, whatever they are agreed to. But as a buyer's agent, you're representing them. And then you can start counseling them as to what the price should be and how much you'd offer. And make sure you do this, make sure you do that. I would ask for this. I wouldn't ask for that, that type of thing. Okay. So on lines 424 through 441, it says, and on the, if you're writing this contract and you're a buyer's agent, you're going to click on buyer's agent, and also I've already signed it that you're designated, so you'll mark designated, and then you're going to put in Keller Williams Lake at the Ozarks Realty and the office ID number, which is the MRC license number 201-403-6085. You're going to put in your printed name and your license number, and you're going to sign. On this side on the right, if you're representing the buyer and it's Remax listing, you're going to look on the MLS sheet, and it's going to tell you that they are a seller's limited agent. Most generally, they are always designated. Okay? So you can mark those two. You would put in their firm name exactly as it's put in the MLS. Their license number is in there also. The name of the agent you're working with and their license number. This all has to be filled out because this is, you sign this, you are not part of this contract. This contract is between the buyer and the seller. But this is a notification that you have told them what agency there is. Buyer and seller confirmed that receipt of the broker disclosure form, which you should have given them in the very beginning, prescribed by the Missouri Real Estate Commission. The undersigned licensing broker relationship is required by law or regulation was made to the seller. I can't do all this. Was made to this, oops, to the seller and or the buyer or the respective broker in case may be by said undersigned licensing no later than the first showing of the property on first contact or immediately upon the occurrence of any changes in their relationship. So this is just the disclosure that you are saying and they are agreeing to when they sign it that you have told them what your agency laws are. Okay? And then, oh, franchise disclosure. It just says that one or more may be a franchise, that the sales information will be disseminated through the MLS. So we're going to tell them what the sale price was and what was included. Purpose of this seller representative is not a foreign person or describing a foreign investment. We've never dealt with a foreign person, anti-terrorist, that type of thing. Acceptance deadline. In this day and time with multiple offers, you probably want to put a short time frame in there, although sometimes buyers or sellers are saying, I won't look at a contract until the 3rd day it's listed, or the 5th day, or until Sunday, or whatever. So you can put that deadline. If you don't put a deadline in here, then if it doesn't go through, you need to remove the contract. There has to be an acceptance deadline in here. I normally do not put a time frame in here, because if I put it needs to be accepted by 5 p.m. on May 15th, and the seller signs it in person, and they date it May 15th, but they don't time their signature, then I've got to go back and get the time frame. So I normally put on there no time frame, but I always put on a deadline for acceptance. Is a deadline for acceptance. This is that the seller has only got until tomorrow to accept this contract as is. They can counter it at any time. Okay? This is for acceptance only. And then, of course, you print the buyer's name. You print the seller's name, which should be on the MLS sheet. And if someone's signing on behalf, print that envelope. That is the contract. Any questions? Have I completely confused you? I want to tell you, if you take the time just to read over this contract, take your time and then highlight something. If you don't understand it, highlight it, come to me. My job is your broker. When you mess up, it reflects on me. Is there a real estate commission? If they come after you, they come after me too. Doesn't seem quite fair, but they do. So my job is to make sure to keep you out of real estate court and out of lawsuits, and to make everything fine. My best advice to you is always keep your customer or your client as a priority. I've got a buyer. I'm going to do my best to find them exactly what they want. I'm going to constantly search and help them look. I'm going to go out and preview properties that I think possibilities and call them immediately if I think it's the one, especially in this market. I keep talking about this market. This is the craziest market I've ever seen, and I've been selling since 1983. It's just absolutely unbelievable. It will calm down, and I'll be glad when it does, because right now, if you've got buyers, it's a difficult position to be in, because they're probably going to pay more than it's worth, and they may not get it, and they may go through 2 or 3 contracts and not get it, and then they get upset with you because they think you've done something wrong, and it's not your fault. So always keep in mind, I'm a buyer's agent. My job is to help them find what they want, help them negotiate the best price for them, help them get the contract, walk them through everything that needs to be done, make sure their inspections are done on time, make sure their financing is done on time, make sure anything in the contract that's written is done the way it's supposed to be done. Keep on top of it. Keep on top of it. You got your earnest money in time. If I'm the listing agent, my job is just the opposite. It's to get the property sold, so it's to help the seller price it correctly, get a good contract on it, and then walk them through. So it just starts when you write the contract. You've done all this work. You've sent out stuff to your buyers, and they finally found some houses, and they're going to come down and look. Once you write that contract and it's accepted, that's when it all begins. That's when you have to follow up with the dates and make sure it is your job to do that. It's no one else's job. To make sure that things are done the way they're supposed to be done, and that they're done in a timely manner that's according to the contract. You also are there to help and advise them, keep them calm and collected, keep them advised of everything that's going on. Seller took the refrigerator. You know, what could we do about that? Well, if we found out prior to closing, then we could have asked for some money at closing, not close until they paid for the refrigerator. And of course, let me give you an example too. That refrigerator, which was 13 years old, was a nice side-by-side with drawers. It had a dent in it. What do you think that's worth? Guess what they had to do? The agents had to buy a brand new $2,300 refrigerator. Now, was this right? No. You know, but they couldn't get the seller to bring it back. He was in Texas. And so the buyer's going, no, I want this refrigerator. Well, you can argue with them all day long. They take you to court over it, you're probably going to lose. So who wants to go to court? Just buy the dang refrigerator and go forward. But that $100 refrigerator turned into a $2,300 refrigerator, split two ways, a listing agent and a buyer's agent. Hopefully, yeah. Hopefully, in this case, they blamed the listing agent, which was not her fault. Matter of fact, they badmouthed the listing agent on Facebook, which was not her fault. You know, it was, if anything, it was the buyer's agency's fault, because as a buyer's agent, if my buyers weren't doing a walkthrough, I would have done the walkthrough. Even though I don't want you to do that, at least to see that everything's there that's supposed to be there. Make sense? Yeah. If they can't do, if the buyer cannot do the walkthrough, I suggest you do it. I suggest you don't verbally tell them or in writing what's there and what's not there. I suggest you take a video of the entire house and say, I'm doing the walkthrough, here it is. So if you see something you don't like or it's missing, please let me know. Because if you go there and you say everything's there, and then you go downstairs and you forgot the water softener they took in, you're buying a water softener. Or if there's furniture, even worse. You know, the other day it was the seller took, it was all the furniture supposed to be there, and they took the mattress and box springs and put an old one there. How do we know? Number one, that it was old. But anyway, I mean, furniture gets so involved, and it's just such a petty thing, but it happens. They're buying a $500,000 house, but they're worried about a mattress. I knew their mattress, whatever. Sorry, Mo. So, any questions, guys? This was just the sales contract, and there's so many other aspects to the sales contract. The addendums that can go along with it, subject to selling your house, subject to closing on your house, backup contract. And I think next time, I think we're going to have Sherry Wig to talk to us about condos, because she's the condo queen here, and as long as she's available, and we'll do listings and condos. So thank you, guys, and I hope you learned something. Let me see what you're talking about. Oh, but $100,000, $2,000, earnest money $500. There's nothing. Yeah. He does.